On this edition of Next Africa, crypto on the continent. We look into how African nations are instituting rules to regulate the crypto industry as major international players look to expand across the region. Plus, philanthropist and businessman Mo Ibrahim on rethinking the financing framework across the continent.
Excuse me, 650 million, your budget for the African Union, 70% of that is paid by foreigners. What are you doing?
And South Africa's citrus squeeze, how the nation's biggest agricultural export is preparing for the imposition of 30% tariffs on its U.S.-bound products. Welcome to Next Africa. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this month we delve into the world of crypto. Now, when you think cryptocurrency, sub-Saharan Africa doesn't naturally come to mind. The region accounts for the world's smallest share, making up just 2.7% of transactions between July of 2023 and June of 2024. But momentum is growing. When it comes to global adoption, Nigeria is second only to India. Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa are also major players. And while crypto trading is still illegal in most African nations and trading activities are closely monitored by central banks, some countries are passing laws to regulate crypto exchanges. And as regulation improves, appetite for crypto is growing, especially for stablecoins, which account for almost half of the region's total transaction volume. Because they track the dollar, they're becoming a popular workaround for companies stymied by currency shortages on the continent.
Stablecoins now have a market cap of around $250 billion, $5 trillion worth of transaction volumes were settled last year, estimated, and about 50% now of blockchain activity relates to stablecoins. So definitely there's significant upward momentum, and particularly in Africa, where also, stablecoins now account for about 50% of blockchain activity.
Can you talk about what the volume is, though, that Yellow Card is seeing? Because your company is still about only 10 years old. What sort of pickup have you seen over the past few years?
Yeah, so a lot of pickup, right? We've processed about $6 billion worth of transaction volume in the last several years. 99% of that is stablecoins. The reason for that is in Africa and other emerging economies across the world, stablecoins provide a real-world solution to many problems faced by financial institutions, businesses, and even individuals.
But why then are we still seeing some pushback in some countries across the continent then, Craig?
Africa is probably one of the most progressive places when it comes to digital asset regulation. You have 7 or 8 places on the continent that already have an established digital asset regulatory framework. You have many others moving in that direction. I mean, just this year we had in March, Kenya, Zambia, and Rwanda published draft legislation. You also even have Morocco, where crypto transactions have been banned since 2017. They recently put draft legislation to lawmakers, and the central bank governor there has said that by the end of the year they should have a regulatory framework for digital assets.
But has Yellow Card, though, seen the same amount of reception? Because Yellow Card, as we know, has not necessarily been authorized by some of these central banks, Ghana in particular I'm talking about. What's
Sure.
been sort of the friction between the company and some of these countries?
I think generally our regulatory engagement is very proactive. So we were actually in Kenya. We were invited by the Finance Committee to help draft the legislation that's going to Parliament this summer. In a lot of markets, it's true, digital assets have not been regulated, so they've been an unregulated area. We've been pushing for regulation.
Do you think, Craig, current market dynamics are potentially helping fuel some of that pickup, as you're mentioning? Of course, we're seeing in the U.S. There is adoption or regulation that's making its way through Congress. Of course, geopolitical developments, currency volatility. I mean, how much of that is sort of leading to what we're seeing in some of these countries?
I think it's all leading to that. And if you look at the market dynamics, right, in the last year, 70% of African economies have faced crisis levels of U.S. dollar liquidity. Like it or not, right, the U.S. dollar is used predominantly for any type of intra-Africa payments. In fact, I think almost 80% of intra-Africa payments clear outside the continent because they're done in dollars, right? International exports and imports, all these require dollars, or now we have a proxy for dollars being US dollar stablecoins.
Thanks so much. Craig Storr, Yellow Card General Counsel, joining us there to talk all things stablecoins. Craig, thanks for joining us. Now let's turn to Del Titus Bawa, the CEO of Web3 Africa Group. The group is based in Accra, Ghana, and acts as a digital currency innovation hub, engaging with both public and private sector companies on the proliferation of the technology.
Doing some significant work, mainly with the Central Bank of Ghana. And over the last 2 years, what the Central Bank of Ghana has done is they have worked very closely with the ecosystem. And their objective there is to make sure they have a very, very clear insight on exactly what it means to have innovation within the digital asset space. And so they worked with us in bringing together key stakeholders. We worked with them for over a year. And the objective there was to establish a policy framework that was balanced, obviously keeping to the formalities of the financial institution, the country, all the regulations that will ensure that we have a very robust industry once it kicks off.
And this is one central bank you're talking about, Del. I wonder if some of the concern is whether or not we're going to get a unified approach to digital assets across the continent, or if we will see fragmentation, and whether that's going to ultimately affect adoption.
No, actually, there's movement, right, from Kenya's central bank. I believe they've got a policy that is fully drafted and ready to launch, if not already. Nigeria has got a policy in place, although I think with some of the central banks, some of the approaches they're taking could be slightly a bit more conservative. And so each central bank is very clear that this industry is here to stay.
So we're just looking at the countries that are on the global list for crypto adoption. How does interoperability fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely important. Now, when it comes to Africa, as you know, we have the Francophone countries, and then we have the Anglophone countries, right? And so there are various different regions, and they come with different responsibilities. And so I think one thing we're very clear on is that there needs to be slight modification, but as a whole, it's super important that we do have interoperability, which is why stablecoins are so important, and seeing how they can be integrated with some of the CBDC projects that some of the central banks are thinking of launching, how we bring that together. And more importantly, it promotes financial inclusion, right, on the continent in a very, very major way for the unbanked in particular. But I think all this just comes down to obviously the innovators really want to get on with things, and obviously the central bank's job is to make sure that they create an environment that is safe for everybody.
And then what does that look like then moving forward, Del, in a best case scenario potentially?
I mean, in our case in Ghana, one of the things that we've adopted is we've established a chamber, a crypto chamber, which is basically focused on kind of consolidating this fragmentation between the ecosystem and the central bank, right? And so the Chamber of Digital Assets and Blockchain Innovation in Ghana, its key focus is to find where the gaps are.
Thanks so much, Del Titus Bawa, the CEO of Web3 Africa Group, joining us there. Still ahead, Mo Ibrahim is on a mission to improve locally driven development projects and African finance growth initiatives. I sit down with the billionaire telecom mogul and philanthropist next. Welcome back to Next Africa. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. Ever since joining Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's Giving Pledge in 2007, Sudanese-born billionaire and former tech mogul Mo Ibrahim has dedicated his time to his foundation, focused on encouraging better governance in Africa. This year's annual Ibrahim Governance Weekend brought together heads of state and business leaders to explore carving a more self-reliant way ahead for the continent. I sat down with Mo in a wide-ranging discussion to understand his thoughts on how to help finance a more sustainable path to growth.
We are in a tight corner in Africa, and I think the top priority in my mind, really, to sort this mess out is peace and security. If you look around you, you'll see that we now have more conflicts than any time in our history. Everywhere, we have so many conflicts. We are destroying the little we have. We're producing more refugees, more displaced people. And what development we are talking about, first, let's have peace. That is a prerequisite for any development or any movement forward. That's a big problem. Then, of course, we have the debt crisis. People borrowed too much money, and the interest rates in Africa is very high. And we find now that a lot of African countries is spending on interest payments more than they spend on education or health. Is that a recipe for development?
What do you want to see from the governments here on the continent to address some of these threats?
Good governance is a starting point. Until we have good governance and decent leadership, then we're going to always have problems. And you look at the top 5 or 10 countries in the index, and you see some governments are really doing well. You see Botswana is doing well. You see Mauritius is doing well. You see Namibia is doing well. You see even South Africa doing reasonably well, although they had their issues about state capture and other things. But we are 54 countries. So, you know, it doesn't mean that in the rest of countries we really are doing well. We are not doing well, frankly. And we need to be honest about this. And any improvement in Africa has to come from within Africa. So we are not overpopulated at all. We have a lot of resources, land resources, blue economy, you know, they have all these waters around us with all the richness. So we have also a good percentage of young people, which is important for any developing economy.
You also say, Mo, that the erosion of aid could potentially be a wake-up call. This could also dent governments' budgets by the hundreds of millions. It could set back progress made on illnesses. Why are you convinced that this won't set back any sort of progress?
This sudden action is painful, but let's look at numbers. All the US aid to Africa is less than 1% of the income of just 42 countries, not the 54 countries, less than 1%. So it's not a cliff edge. It is not a cliff edge. And in the larger scale of things, honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What we need to look at our own resources and deploy it. We have about $350 billion in sovereign funds and pension funds in Africa, which is mostly invested overseas. Why don't we invest it in Africa? And if we don't invest our money in Africa, do we expect foreigners to come and spend their money in Africa? Come on.
Mo, as somebody who made your billions working on the continent in many ways, you are a private businessman. What is the role of the private sector in helping the continent then achieve some of these goals that you're mentioning?
You cannot invest in a country where the rule of law is not good enough. We need to create the environment which attracts investment. That's a bonus. Also, we having conversations with the rating agencies because the cost of capital in Africa is too high. And that is a great also problem which impedes investment in Africa because it costs 10%, maybe more, if you borrow in Africa as compared when you borrow in Europe or in US. So the cost of capital in Africa is quite high.
You had a very successful telecom business. I wonder, when you look at the telecom landscape on the continent and you think about connectivity and the role that that plays in economic growth, are you pleased with the state of the telecom industry, or do you think there should be more consolidation?
Actually, I think the telecom sector is doing very well. And I'm very pleased with the role we played in that. When nobody wanted to go into Africa and invest in telecom, and we went and we did it and became successful, and then everybody went to Africa. So telecommunication in Africa now is one of the bright spots. I mean, the percentage, things have changed now, but a few years ago, African usage of mobile phone was as a ratio compared to fixed lines was much higher than many countries in Europe. And Africa usage of mobile phones for payment system, we're ahead of everybody else. So a great environment was created there. So I'm quite happy with that. I don't think we need consolidation because competition is good for consumer.
Coming up, African agricultural exporters are preparing for higher tariffs on exports to the U.S. We check in with one South African producer on how he's getting ready for the squeeze expected from the levies. And for the latest installment of our Investing Africa series, Ian Lessam, managing partner of VC firm Havake, on the role of local investment firms in bringing in global players.
Each market in Africa is very nuanced, having the right networks, understanding how to work with people culturally, where the skills gaps are, etc. So having that sort of local manager or local expertise is really important. But we are seeing more and more international players wanting to partner with us, to partner with our companies. So across the portfolio, we would have worked with some of the household names. So in the trade world, General Motors, in the VC world, the likes of a Greylock, in the private equity world, the likes of Patience Squared. So really, some of the bigger names in the industry are starting to take notice of what we're doing, what our companies are doing.
South Africa is waiting anxiously to find out whether the Trump administration makes good on its threat to impose 30% tariffs on exports to the United States when a 90-day grace period expires in July. If Washington follows through, South Africa's fruit growers in particular could be hit hard, with tens of thousands of jobs on the line. The country is the world's second biggest citrus exporter, and the U.S. is a key market. I traveled to the heart of South Africa's citrus farming region to find out more. During summer months, when oranges in Florida and California aren't in season, the United States imports most of its fruit from Southern Hemisphere producers like Peru and from groves such as this one in South Africa. It's South Africa's biggest agricultural export, with citrus products destined for the U.S. alone accounting for $132 million in 2022. We are here in Citrusdale, a town in the Western Cape that's home to around 200 farms. It's also the only fruit-producing region in South Africa with direct access to the U.S. market. Among the region's farmers meeting the strict U.S. regulations for sales is Gerrit van der Merwe. He grows 50 different varieties of fruit spread over 1,000 hectares. From growing, picking, packing, and shipping, his team does it all from this one-stop facility.
For ALG in the Citrusdal Valley, we're very much European based. So Europe is our biggest market, then the US. But the US takes our premium product. So we send our best product to the USA to make sure we get our premium prices.
His oranges, limes, and lemons end up on the shelves of Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, benefiting from a U.S. trade law called AGOA. It provides duty-free access to the U.S. market, access President Trump has threatened to end. As a result, South Africa's agriculture minister has strongly urged farmers to look for new export markets. But that's easier said than done.
Citrusdal has been supplying under AGOA for about 25 years into the USA. So we've built our supply chains, we've built our supermarkets, we've built our importing companies on that side. So we've been trying to hone that market to make sure that we're very, very efficient going into that market. For us, it's very naive to think we can move a market.
Trade was a key issue for President Cyril Ramaphosa during his May visit to President Donald Trump. And while the meeting was tense, ABSA economist Marlene Lowe said she still expects the tariff to return to the original baseline level.
We agree with the 10% dispensation going on beyond the 9th of July. I think given the fact that South Africa submitted a trade proposal after our presidential visit to the US, kind of leaves things open and we don't foresee the 30% being reinstated.
As his produce leaves Cape Town Harbor for the U.S., the next few months will provide valuable insights on whether American consumers can absorb higher costs. For Herritt, retaining market share despite any new tariffs will be key.
We're hoping that sanitary will prevail and we can stay on the 10%, and the 10% we'll manage. I think it's going to make fruit slightly more expensive in the USA.
And the fruits of Herritt's labor may profit handsomely if he turns out to be right. And citrus farms aren't the only agribusiness threatened by Trump's tariffs. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Ntando Tukwana, who has been reporting on this story for us. So, Ntando, besides citrus, what are the other sectors in South Africa that you think are most vulnerable to these tariffs?
I mean, some of the notable industries that are finding themselves in the crosshairs of these trade tariffs are our wine industry, as well as our automotive industry. For our wine industry, for instance, we save about 20 million rand annually from exporting our produce under the AGOA, which obviously, as you know, allows African exporters to, ship their products to the US markets duty-free. So we potentially stand to lose out on that saving. And the US has been touted as a strategic market specifically for the wine industry, so that is a huge loss for them. And on the auto sector, we know that there's a separate levy that has been imposed on South Africa's automotive sector, which is placed at 25%. And the industry body has actually warned that producers or car manufacturers and parts manufacturers will not be able to absorb the additional costs from the tariffs. So that's a huge issue. But they've also said that the tariff stands to threaten operations and value chains in the region and, threaten producers such as Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Toyota, which have, quite sizable operations and plants in the country.
Bloomberg's Ntando Tukwana, thanks so much for your reporting and for joining us this month. And that is Next Africa for this month. But don't forget our weekly podcast to digest more of what's happening across the continent. That's available on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you usually get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to our bi-weekly Next Africa newsletter, available on the terminal and website for even more reporting from the Bloomberg team. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. See you next time.